Hey everyone, it's that time of the week again. It's the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I am Anthony Cosenza, joined by my co-host Scott Schultze. Thanks so much for joining us live if you are able to. Appreciate that. You can check us out on Cincy Jungle, the live feed there, and we are live on YouTube as well. Scott, for me, it's been kind of a long week, but it feels like I haven't talked to you in so long, but it's just been our standard week. How are you doing, my friend?
Pretty good. We are actually not having winter in Ohio this year, which is pretty amazing. We had a brief winter before Christmas, and yeah, we're out. I mean, it's been 50, 60 degrees. I know for California, it's probably, bitterly cold, but yeah, just enjoying the nice Ohio, the unseasonably nice Ohio weather.
Usually I'd agree with you that that is really cold for California weather, and I mean, for the most part it is, but we've actually had a ton of rain out here in Southern California, which and a lot of, cold wind and just funky weather. And after so long of California experiencing kind of a drought or whatever, we've had a ton of rain in the state, which is a good thing, obviously, but it's just kind of rare for us. So we've experienced a little bit of weather our way too. I hope you're staying warm though. You got the hooded sweatshirt on, so it looks like you're cozy.
Yeah, I've noticed, not by choice, or I guess by choice, not by intent. I've actually been wearing hooded sweatshirts, I think, the last 3 or 4 episodes. Although this time it's actually a Bengals one and not the Bill Belichick kind of, old, dirty, just gray one.
Well, you got to cut the sleeves off of it too, right? If you really want to.
I'm not quite ready to get that far. You can't really see the sleeves in the screenshot anyway, so
that's right.
I could always roll them up.
And when you're Bill Belichick and you've been to 5 Super Bowls and won a bunch, you can kind of do what you want, though.
Well, I have won a whole bunch of Super Bowls. Don't know if those count.
Well, they do, especially if you're our old Cincy Jungle friend Mickey Mentzer. They count a lot. He's the Tecmo Super Bowl guy. So, there's a lot of Cincy Jungle ties to old Tecmo Super Bowl. So, I mean, if you're a champion there, why not? But let's dive right in, Scott. We've got a lot to cover, even though it's kind of a slower period in the NFL calendar. The Bengals have been doing some stuff, both in terms of player acquisitions, news with former players, all kinds of stuff going on. But before we get to that, let's start with what we've been doing, and we're kind of getting close to coming to a close, I think, on this. The state of the running backs with the Cincinnati Bengals. Last year, there was some good, some bad. There's, they obviously have talent there, but the question is how much talent and who's going to do what in 2017. And then obviously there's some high-profile names in the draft to look at. So let's start when we talk about the running backs, what you saw out of the crew last year, be it Jeremy Hill, Giovanni Bernard, who went down in that terrible, I think it was week 11 against the Bills. A.J. Green went out for the rest of the season. Giovanni Bernard was out for the rest of the season after that game. Jeremy Hill, a lot of people weren't pleased with some of the things he did, but he didn't fumble the ball away, which is a big thing of his last year. The year prior. And he did, get in the end zone quite often. And then we saw Rex Burkhead towards the end of the year have some good games as well. What did you see last year that you liked, that you didn't like? And what's ahead maybe for the players currently on the roster?
You mentioned this is one of the last ones we're going to be doing. So probably going to be one of the shortest ones too, because we don't really have very many running backs on the roster, which is kind of weird for the Bengals. But you look at last year, what went right and wrong. Jeremy Hill, there was so much hype for him after his rookie year that I think was from week 8 through week 16, led the NFL in rushing, had this insane run of games. Since then, it's just been kind of a disaster. 2.5. So he's been in the league 3 years. 2.5 of those 3 years been very underimpressive. Seems to lack vision. The explosiveness isn't really there. He did have the fumble issues, as you mentioned, not so much last year, but for the career, still has a pile of them over that span for those 2.5 years. His yards per carry is under 3.7, which is very, unimpressive. And he only has 2 games in that whole stretch. There's I forget what it's 43, 40 some games in that stretch of 2.5 years. And only 2 of them were 100-yard games, and both of them were against the Browns. So, which isn't really saying a whole lot. So I think there's a lot to be disappointed by with him. He does get the touchdowns, but that's because when they get the 1 yard line, they just give it to him and eventually he gets in. Giovanni Bernard, you'd like to think there's better things with him. He's a great receiver. He's a good pass blocker, kind of the consummate third down back. The way he's built, the way he runs, the way he can run from the backfield. They use him a lot on those draw plays and those screens. The way he can catch the ball, he can make difficult catches. Not like AJ Green, but still, for a running back, make sure he good catches.
Right.
He can pick up pass rushers. He makes the elusive plays, which is there's some of those big highlight runs like the Miami Dolphins game where he does some of these crazy things. But despite that, he doesn't really have a high yards per carry, which is kind of surprising. And I think some of it is the yards after contact. He's not much of the downhill runner. One of those guys that, if you get him in space and get him started, he can do some cool things, but he doesn't often create without having a little bit of help. And then, of course, you have the issue he's coming off the major injury this year. So you don't really know what you're going to have this year. There's no guarantees he'll be ready for training camp if he's out. In theory, 12 months, that would bring him back, halfway through the season, and then you hope he's 100%. And we kind of saw with Geno Atkins what happened when he got hurt with a similar injury. He was out for a while. He did come back in that first year. He just wasn't the same guy. So you look at the two guys you have on the roster. You have a very unimpressive Jeremy Hill, a better but injured Giovanni Bernard, and then the only other guy they have under contract right now is Trey Carson, who they've never given an NFL snap. So that's pretty much it. And then, of course, you look at the guys who they had last year. Cedric Pierman, the 30-year-old special teamer, he's a good special teams guy. I think a lot of fans would be happy if he came back in that role. Although I'm still surprised they activated him over William Jackson III, since William Jackson was your first-round pick, and he's the future of your team. Pierman being a free agent, it made no sense. You're bringing back a 30-year-old guy. Granted, you obviously want better special teams play, but when you're out of the playoffs, why not play for the future? And then there was the one bright spot you mentioned, Rex Burkhead. I think fans were kind of mixed on him because we hadn't really seen much of him. I know people who followed him in Nebraska were kind of high on him, but he seemed to be one of these guys. Okay, he's a very good feel-good story. He has some very good, off-field traits, but we really hadn't seen much. And we finally saw him, and by far he had to be the most explosive running back we had last year. And not just in terms of the numbers and yards per carry, but just the things he did, the way he created plays, the way he made, yards when there were no yards there. I think he was very exciting to watch. He was the guy you watch and you're like, wow, yeah, this is pretty awesome. It was a breath of fresh air to see what he could do, because one of the complaints we often say is, okay, Hill has a bad yards per carry and Giovanni Bernard sometimes has some slow starts, but look who they're running behind. They're going behind a Boyhe. They're going behind Bodine. They don't have a chance. Well, you put Burkhead behind the exact same line, and he just looked so much better. He looked like a much more dynamic runner. He seemed to have a drive, and I think it was one of those things where it was very exciting to see. You'd love to see him go out there and do that, kind of vindicate, hey, he's been sitting forever. He has this great opportunity, and he does that. But of course, he does it right before a contract year, or right before his contract comes up. So the Bengals kind of put themselves in it's a good position to be in for Burkhead, obviously, but by him coming out and having a great year or great run of games right before his contract expires means he's probably not someone you can bring back for a cheap backup role. He's probably going to be looking for starter money somewhere, or at least a split role. If he's not going to be signed as a guaranteed starter, probably something similar to what Toby Gerhart had when he left the Vikings and went down to Jacksonville. A guy where they said, okay, we're going to make you the starter or the preliminary back in a committee, and we're going to pay you accordingly. And I assume Burkhead will get something similar like that. And if that's the case, I don't think the Bengals are going to pay him, since they just paid Giovanni Bernard.
I love everything you said. Like I said, we're going to talk about what may be ahead this season for the Bengals running back group. I just kind of want to give my thoughts on what you were saying, as well as just kind of what's going on with the running back group as a whole. In terms of Pierman, I really like the guy. I think the team loves him, especially as a Charlie Hustle guy, a guy who will do all the dirty work on special teams and things like that. He obviously is well respected in the locker room. I think he's kind of a player chaplain from what I've read and understood, and a lot of players look up to him, not only for that respect, but just his character and being a solid football player that maybe isn't the most talented player on the roster, but does whatever the coaches want and, really embodies a team player, which the Bengals, especially in the early Marvin Lewis era, didn't really have too many of those. They had a lot of me first guys. And so I think Pierman is valuable, not only on the field, but in the locker room as well. He is coming off a pretty significant injury. I think he broke his forearm or something like that in the preseason and obviously missed a significant amount of time. Is he replaceable on the field? Yeah. I mean, I think you could get a guy that's still a pretty good special teams player, or you may have a defensive back or something like that that could be a good special teams player. But I think most fans wouldn't be unhappy if Pierman returned to the Bengals, especially because he would be pretty affordable as well. It's really those three other guys that present a major problem and a major amount of discussion probably within that front office this year. Jeremy Hill, it was his second best season of his 3-year career. Still not an outstanding one. You mentioned, there were times where he still was kind of running into tackles, wasn't breaking enough tackles. Again, I mentioned the fumble issues were remedied, but there were more explosive plays this year than last year, but nowhere near what he was in his rookie year. So I don't know. I don't know what that is. I don't know what really is attributing to that. I don't know if he's in his own head. I don't know if he just was kind of a bright-eyed rookie that felt like he didn't have much to lose, and the scheme worked for him as a rookie and just hasn't worked the same way since. I don't know if it's a combination of issues. There's a lot going on there. I've stuck up for him this offseason based on some improvements, but then you look at his stats and really his only big games, he did pretty well against Denver, but his two other big games were against Cleveland, and Cleveland was awful this year. So and that's a big chunk of his stats were really in those two Cleveland games, and then obviously that Denver game. But you would kind of expect a second-round pick, a guy that was nearly Rookie of the Year in 2014. You'd kind of expect multiple 100-yard games a season out of this guy. We're talking 4 or 5. He is good at the goal line. He gets into the end zone, which is obviously a valuable trait. But I think the Thunder and Lightning approach, for whatever reason, with Hill and Bernard just hasn't really clicked since they've been together. I mean, Hill had his most success when Bernard was injured towards the tail end of 2014. Didn't really pick it up in the same way this year when Bernard went down. And then that's the other issue you mentioned, how obviously today's medicine, today's scientific advances, athletes can recover from these type of devastating knee injuries and things like that much quicker than they used to. I mean, a lot of times these were injuries that were career ending, and now it's, hey, a year later you're back on the field and you're playing pretty well. You can't really bank on that, though. You mentioned Atkins. That's got to be something in the back of their minds when it comes to Bernard and his comeback trail. I agree with you on the, he may resemble more of a third down back, especially what we've seen from him in his time as a Bengal. But I kind of place him in the middle of that every down back and third down back. I think he's a bit more versatile than a lot of other just third down backs in the league. But at the same time, I don't think that you can give the guy necessarily 25, 30 carries many times in a season, as well as throw him the ball, whether it's injury history or scheme or whatever. I almost wonder if any guy on this roster is a true work bell cow back, and maybe they don't need that. But this team, when they've gone to the playoffs many times, whether it was Rudy Johnson, Cedric Benson, whoever, they had a guy, and they fared well as running backs in this system. And these guys are doing pretty good things, but no one's really the shining star of the group. Burkhead, to me, it was impressive what he did against the Ravens, especially since they had such a high highly ranked rush defense in 2016, but they were out of the playoff picture. They might have mailed it in. Is that just kind of a flash in the pan game for Rex Burkhead? It's a big gamble if the Bengals are saying, hey, you're going to be a high-profile back for us this offseason, and they may pass on some other high-profile guys, whether it's free agency in the draft. Now, that segues into 2017. Scott, you had put up a post on Cincy Jungle, which we are live at currently, as well as on our YouTube channel, about Leonard Fournette in particular being possibly a Jeremy Hill clone, and not just because of the LSU thing, but maybe size, other issues. And I want you to talk about that. But obviously at number 9, if some of the guys they like are off the board, whether it's a run on defensive linemen, if Reuben Foster's maybe gone, if Mike Williams or Corey Davis are gone for some reason, and they're staring at either Dalvin Cook or Leonard Fournette, they think that one of those guys could be a franchise-changing player. They may, really think hard about that at number 9. Well, your thoughts on those two guys, as well as kind of talk about your post that you put up on Cincy Jungle examining Fournette.
Yeah, and I think, like as you said, the whole thing with them going, I don't think they would go into the draft maybe targeting Fournette as much as, okay, some of the guys they're looking at, right, be it Solomon Thomas or Corey Davis, Mike Williams, or Burrito Charlton or whoever. Sorry, Taco Charlton. Whoever it would be.
I love it. That's his new name.
If one of those guys is, let's say they're targeting a few of them and they're all gone, and they tend to be a team that generally goes best player available. I think we saw that when they drafted Eifert. They didn't really have a spot from his first year. They did that with Drake Kirkpatrick and sat him for 3 years because they had Adam Jones and Terrence Newman and additional Leon Hall. So I think if they really felt, that Fournette or, even Cook from Florida State was a best player available, I think they could pursue him. And based on what a lot of the draft nicks are, kind of saying, Fournette seems to be someone that they're rating in that top 5, top 10. So it just that kind of led the post of, okay, is he really a top 5, top 10 guy? There are some similarities between him and Jeremy Hill. So the post is basically, hey, here's some of the similarities, guy. Here are some of the similarities these guys have. Hey, readers, commenters, whatever. What do you think? Do you think they're truly unique? Is one kind of is Fournette just another Hill? And some of the similarities, that both had a very good first year where they led their team in rushing. They both had a great second and third year, as far as overall production, yards per carry, touchdowns, etc. The one difference is Hill was only there 2 years. Fournette was there 3 years. Hill was a redshirt freshman, so he left after his third year, which was a redshirt sophomore year. So he only actually played 2 years. Fournette was there all 3 years. They both are very big runners, are like 6'1", 230. Both play with a very powerful style, both downhill. And they also had very big holes. They had very good offensive lines in front of them. And you watch a lot of the highlights, and they do some good stuff, but a lot of their highlights are, they're not touched until they get a full set of steam and they're 5 yards into the secondary. And then they get hit. Well, by then, it's a very different situation than getting hit, at the line of scrimmage or in the backfield. So and kind of point out, okay, well, here's some of the differences. The differences are Fournette seems to be faster. He obviously hasn't run the 40 yet at the combine, but he seems to be faster. He seems to be better at getting to that speed. One of the knocks on Hill in the draft evaluation was there seemed to be some issues with balance and vision, and we kind of see that, as you mentioned, him running maybe not in the right areas, running into people, not always taking the right lane. But is that enough of a difference to really differentiate the two that say, yes, Fournette is truly Adrian Peterson and not Jeremy Hill, or is he somewhere in between? And I think one thing that a lot of draft followers may not have followed that closely is the SEC tends to produce a lot of highly rated running backs that come out as far as the draft and get drafted in the first, second round, but then go on to have very mediocre NFL careers. So I'll do this quickly. I'm just going to read off the list of running backs drafted from the SEC in the last few years who went in the first round. Felix Jones, obviously never did anything. Darren McFadden, tons of speed, never really did anything. No Sean Marino, really amounted to anything.
Yeah, boy. Yep.
Mark Ingram, decent when healthy, but has never really turned into much. Trent Richardson, obviously a bust. And the last one, Todd Gurley, who jury's still out on him, had a great first year, looked very mediocre his second year. You go to the second round, it's not really a whole lot better. Kenny Irons, who obviously got hurt. Montario Hardesty, never done much. Ben Tate, Christine Michael, Eddie Lacy had a decent first year. Jeremy Hill, TJ Yeldon, and Derrick Henry, who was a rookie. And then you go to the third round, you have Jacob Hester, who is more of a fullback. Glenn Coffey, Stephen Ridley, Al Davis, Trey Mason, Matt Jones, and Kenyon Drake. So over the last decade, those have been the highest regarded, highest drafted running backs for the SEC. Not really instilling a lot of confidence in me that, based on track record, that Fournette would be any different. I mean, obviously every player is unique. All it takes is one good one to bust that trend. But based on the historical precedents, I'm not quite convinced that Fournette is truly a game-changing, the next Adrian Peterson. I'm sure he'd be a fine running back. He'd be better than Hill. I just, me personally, I'm not a believer in him at number 9.
Yeah, and a lot of people like Dalvin. I mean, a lot of draft nicks like Dalvin Cook even more than Fournette. And I think some of that is a little bit more of the versatility thing. Cook is a bit better of a receiver, I think, in most eyes than Fournette. And so that's something to consider there. In terms of Fournette, a lot of time, the SEC is known as a very, very competitive conference in college, and obviously a lot of talented players come there, but it does seem to be more of a product of coaching, recruitment, overall team talent. You look at Fournette in his 3 years at Louisiana State against who I would venture to guess was probably his against the better defenses in the conference. In 2014, he had 10 carries for 42 yards against Auburn. And then he had 21 carries for 79 yards against Alabama that year. And then the following years, in 2015 and 2016, he had 31 rushing yards against Alabama and 35 rushing yards this past year against Alabama. So usually when you take a running back like that, especially at the college ranks, you need to see them dominate the best competition that they face. Not the, you're looking at Louisiana Monroe, Sam Houston State, and those are obviously some big games that Fournette had in his time there. But you need to see him do well against those SEC powerhouses, and sometimes he didn't do that, and that worries me a little bit about him. The thing that I wonder, and I liked Ezekiel Elliott coming out last year. I didn't love him. I thought he was a talented guy. Obviously, everybody's going to look at him as these two guys, Cook and Fournette, are talked about as first-round prospects. They're going to look at Elliott and say, okay, can we get a guy like that can really change our team? But you look at the offensive line, and you mentioned this, Scott. I mean, you look at the offensive line, and there's just not there's not really much of a comparison, especially with impending free agents the Bengals have on their offensive line compared to the Dallas line. So that's got to be worrisome, and I think a lot of people would rather see them shore up the offensive line first than take a high-profile running back. Are you in that camp?
Yeah, I'm definitely much more of a believer that you build up front offensively and defensively, and then everything else kind of follows. I mean, you look at the Dallas offensive line, you replace, Bodine with Zach Martin, you replace Boyhe with Tyron Smith, and Jeremy Hill and Giovanni Bernard probably get a little better. And I think the same thing too, you put Ezekiel Elliott on the Bengals, he's probably not doing a whole lot more than Hill and Bernard did this year. And a lot of it tends to go to what you have. You have that good of a line. I don't think Dak Prescott has that great of a season if he doesn't have that line giving him all sorts of protection, all sorts of time to find an open receiver. And you look even last year when Dallas, the running back situation when they got hurt, they plugged in Darren McFadden, who'd been left for dead, probably had his best season since his rookie year. Running behind that offensive line.
Yep.
And before him, you had DeMarco Murray, who had a big year. You have a good enough line in the NFL, there's enough talented running backs. So, we saw that with Burkhead, we just talked about. Here's a guy drafted late, kind of sat on the bench for a few years. You put him in, you put him behind a good line, and I think he would look like, the game he did against Baltimore, he'd probably look like that on an everyday basis. Because if you give, enough talented people that much time, they're going to get better. They're going to look better. And so I think it's definitely one of those things that, you put Fournette behind the Bengals line, and I know some people argue, well, talent is talent, and that's true. But talent's only going to get you so far if you're getting hit in the backfield. And the thing you mentioned about him against Alabama is one of the things where I think I disagree with the draft experts on Fournette, is that when you watch his videos, a lot of his big impressive runs are these plays, where they're pulling the center and they're taking out the linebackers, and he's running 5-10 yards before contact, and he has these powerful stiff arms where he can take out the defensive backs. But whenever he's met in the backfield, you don't see him eluding defenders. You don't see him creating. It's often the line is giving you this, and then he goes with it. It's not, okay, you're surrounded, make something happen.
Right.
And there's definitely instances where that happens, but it's not consistent enough to make you think, wow, this guy is a number 9 overall player in all of college football this year, as far as guys to draft.
Yeah, and one of the things, and maybe I'm just kind of getting out there in terms of my opinion, but one of the things I think the Bengals need to look at in terms of a running back is one who has played in some bad weather, whether it's rain or snow or whatever. This team plays all of their games obviously in Cincinnati, and as the year goes on, that's not, the weather doesn't get very friendly there. They play in Pittsburgh once a year, they play in Baltimore once a year, they play in Cleveland once a year. So, and I think that's one of the wise things that goes overlooked when it comes to Le'Veon Bell and the Steelers. Bell was a guy that played at Michigan State in some rough weather, and although he's kind of transformed his running style a little bit from college to pro, I think that's one thing that the Steelers did some good homework on, at least in my opinion, with getting a guy who has played in some poor weather and really knows how to do that, knows how to hang on to the ball in those kind of elements. And I think that's something that's pretty valuable. Scott, we've got a couple of comments on this topic in our YouTube chat. There's Dylan Hart said, why not trade A.J. McCarron to get extra high picks and fix both problems, meaning offensive line and running back? That's a possibility. We're going to talk about A.J. McCarron a little later in the show. Trade Waldo, a regular on this program that joins us, says trade up back to that back end of the first to get Christian McCaffrey and mix him up with Bernard. That's an interesting thought. And Ryan Jones earlier kind of said, in terms when we were talking about the 2016 group, he said, I miss the Bernard and BenJarvus Green-Ellis combo, which is kind of interesting because I think a lot of people were a little fed up with BenJarvus Green-Ellis towards the end of his Bengals tenure because the lack of big plays there, and he was kind of a 3 yards and cloud of dust guy. Any thoughts on any of those comments?
Well, I think the one thing that I'd like to see the Bengals do, and this might be more play calling than anything, and I think this might go towards some of the things mentioned in the questions, is I'd like to see them, whoever they get as running back, have someone that can play all 3 downs. Not that they have to, but that they can. And you kind of alluded to this with Gio. I think he could if they would let him, maybe not carry it 25 times, but be in on different downs. And that's one of the things that makes him so predictable, is that first down, second down, Jeremy Hill's out there, they're going to run. Third down, they put Giovanni Bernard out there, it's going to be either a draw or a screen pass or a pass. And there's no mixing it up. How often do you ever see Jeremy Hill out there on like 3rd and 5, 3rd and 7? Do you ever see Giovanni Bernard out there on 2nd and 1? And the odds, 99% of the time you don't, because they run very particular plays, very particular formations. So whoever they get, I would hate to see them, move on from Hill and then grab another plotter who is going to be a guy they use in that same situation. Where I think someone like McCaffrey, for example, or someone like Cook can do what Bernard can do, where they could play all 3 downs. And if you had someone like that, you could mix them in and out, and you're not telegraphing to the defense, what kind of play you're running based on the formation. So I think that'd be one of the key things for me.
Yeah, and that's, and we joked about Tecmo Super Bowl as we opened the show, and maybe this is a little bit going back to Madden football or whatever, but I would like to see the Bengals have 2 running back formations where guys are in there at the same time and mix it up. Some of that is a little outdated, but, and granted this is, almost 30 years ago now, but when they made their Super Bowl run and they were doing a lot of different things, you would see James Brooks and Nicky Woods in the backfield at the same time, and it was very effective. So I think in terms of, I agree with your predictability type of opinion there, Scott, that I think the Bengals need to maybe get these guys on the field at the same time and say, are they going to give it to Hill or Fournette or Cook or whoever, or are they going to do a dump off to Bernard and really kind of keep a defense honest?
That's definitely one of the most frustrating things. Is if the casual fan watching the game knows where the play is going, you have to figure the guy who's getting paid, $500,000 to coach the team or coach the opposition knows where the ball is going.
Right. Yeah. And unfortunately, I think that is one of the problems that has plagued the running back position over the past couple of seasons since Hill's big year is a little bit of predictable play calling in terms of runs and all of that. So that's our assessment. I think, we gave our opinions and we gave some scenarios. I don't know if we truly have full answers coming up in 2017, but I think the Bengals, whether it's offensive line or adding talent, re-signing guys, they need to do some retooling there in the running game to make that a little bit more of a not that he truly needs it, but a little bit more of a crutch that Andy Dalton can lean on from time to time and a little bit more of a reliable facet to their offense, especially if, God forbid, A.J. Green gets hurt again or something like that. So what do you think, listeners? You can get in touch with us and or catch all of our content in a number of different ways. We're on, as I mentioned a couple times now, we're on Cincy Jungle Live, as well as all of our content is posted there. We have a YouTube channel that we stream live, and you can join us on that. You can also subscribe to that YouTube channel, and I hope you do leave some comments, not only in the live chat, but also on the content we post there. We're also on SoundCloud for the audio snippets of the show, so subscribe there and check out all of the stuff we have there. You can also get in touch with us via Twitter at BengalsOBI, email theobinsider@gmail.com, and if you can't catch the show live and you're more of an Apple guy or what have you, you can catch us on iTunes. We are listed there. You can download the show there. We would love feedback. We appreciate the support you've shown to us, and through this is the 29th episode already, so through these 29 episodes, you guys have been great, and we love that we can interact with you live on the show. We're going to try, as we usually do, try and get to some fan questions if we have time at the end of the show. So you can fire those away either in the YouTube chat or the comment stream on Cincy Jungle. We're going to try. I can't promise at this point. We're going to try and get to those if we can. But if not, there's other opportunities to get in touch with us as well. A familiar face, Scott, arrived at Paul Brown Stadium this week, and a very interesting scenario played out. Kicker Shayne Graham, who did a lot of good things for the Bengals in his time with the team, also missed some very big kicks that a lot of people remember with the Bengals. Came to Paul Brown Stadium, talked with Marvin Lewis in the front office, and they made a deal with the club and the NFL via Roger Goodell to sign a one-day contract to allow Shayne Graham to retire as a Bengal. Now, I mentioned that he obviously maybe fell out of favor towards the end of his Bengals career. He is the second highest point scorer in Bengals history behind Jim Breach, who obviously was with the team for a very long time, but one of the better kickers in Bengals history in terms of statistics, a very community-driven guy when he was in Cincinnati. He did a lot of community work for the city, which was very admirable on his part. All in all, I think pretty good guy, pretty good player. To me, and I'm interested to hear what you have to say about this. To me, I like the idea of, hey, this is a guy who was with us for a long time, did a lot of good things for the Bengals, helped them win a lot of games and get them to the playoffs a couple of times. to me, I love the idea that they're honoring a past player. There are a couple things that strike me as a bit odd with this. Why Shayne Graham, number one, of all of the players that you could do? And I mentioned, obviously, community work, good guy, probably, well-liked by the coaching staff, all of that. And in that respect, he's deserving. But why Shayne Graham over other guys? And is this maybe something that signals the team maybe finally moving to a Ring of Honor, maybe a team Hall of Fame? And if not, how do you make sense of this?
Yeah, and I agree that it's kind of an odd thing. But that being said, I do think after so many years of Doug Pelfrey and Neil Racker's missing kicks, Shayne Graham was definitely a welcome sight. That he kind of his arrival kind of timed in with Marvin Lewis's arrival, and more or less, and kind of with the end of that decade of the '90s where nothing seemed to go right. And all of a sudden, hey, we have a quarterback, Carson Palmer, who can actually complete passes. Hey, we have a kicker who can actually make kicks. So, it was kind of good in that regard. As you said, at the very end, he obviously missed some very key kicks. He was kind of like a Jermaine Gresham, who his whole body of work was pretty solid, but just had some very bad times to make some very bad plays. But it is kind of interesting that despite the fact the team basically let him go and went after Mike Nugent, who they kept for last 7 years, that Graham still wanted to come back and retire as a Bengals. Not too often that you're cut or released or, basically fired. And you want to come back to the team that fired you and retire as a member of that team. So I think it definitely says some things about the team, and it raises some good questions because you said we don't have a Ring of Honor, we don't have a Hall of Fame. I mean, we've had guys like Anthony Munoz and Boomer Esiason and so forth. We've had good players and Ken Anderson, but yet for whatever reason, there's no honoring of them. And to your point, I totally agree. I think if we are going to have these guys come back, I'm thinking there's definitely some other players who played the majority of their careers as Bengals, were very good Bengal players, left and retired. Well, why not bring them back and do the same thing, either at the time they retired or now? I'm sure some guys you can think of. There's some guys I can think of too. So I don't know if you just want me to mention some I have, or
if you have some, go for it.
Yeah, there were a few who I was thinking of during this, Mike. If we brought guys back, and I'm thinking guys who had great runs as Bengals. This is more of a modern list, but who left and then ended up retiring after a short stint. I think the most obvious one would be Chad Johnson or Ocho Cinco. I guess he returned to Johnson. Obviously, most of his production, his All-Pro, Pro Bowl, huge numbers were all in Cincinnati. He left, went to some other stops briefly, but was clearly a Bengal. He was a very enjoyable player. He brought some excitement to the game. You can say what you want about the little off-field antics. When we were winning, I don't think anyone really cared because they were fun. He was having fun. He was always really good with the fans. He's one who I think would clearly deserve to be there. I think someone like Rudy Johnson, he set the single season rushing record in back-to-back years. I think he left, went to Detroit, and just kind of fizzled out. He would be someone who I think would make sense to retire here. Willie Anderson would be a clear.
That's the one that comes to mind. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I think he went Baltimore for a year or something at the end when we let him go and brought Andre Smith or whoever, Dennis Rowland, whoever. I mean, he would be a really he's someone who I think should be in the Hall of Fame. I think he's been on the I forget what they call it, the semifinal or the first round the last few years, but hasn't advanced far enough to make it to the finals and then the ultimate 4 to 8 guys they pick every year. He would be one. One guy who I don't think would come back is someone like Justin Smith, because he played half his games here. He was a great player. He's a borderline Hall of Famer. I think he'd probably choose 49ers if given the choice, but I'd at least extend the offer to him. And then another guy, I thought it was someone like Bobby Williams.
Yep.
I know he didn't start here, but we had with him, he was probably the best right guard we've had since Zeitler, and you could argue maybe even better in Zeitler. I thought he was a very good one. He was very productive near the end of his career. He kind of, as he was kind of going downhill, they let him go, and he retired after joining another team briefly. So I think, yeah, if I was put together a list, those would be the guys who I think would be really good choices to bring back and say, hey, you guys were Bengals. The heart of your career was as a Bengal. Come back, retire as a Bengal. And if we ever get a, Hall of Fame, which will probably be the day after Mike Brown sells the team, the next owner can come in, have a Hall of Fame, bring these guys back, and hopefully put them in, or at the very least, put a number up or something, put them on a placemat or something.
Well, I've got some bad news for you, Scott.
Yes.
I don't think Mike Brown is going to sell the team anytime soon, nor will the Brown family. If and when, and I don't obviously ever wish this on anybody, but if Mike Brown passes away in sometime in the future, I think this team is going to remain in his family's control. So there might be, even though we've seen some different things under Katie Blackburn, his daughter, who was kind of running a lot of things behind the scenes. She's kind of put a little modern twist on some of the things in the way that the Bengals operate, but they're still behind the times in a lot of different ways. Scouting department, the list goes on and on. Scouting department, practice, indoor practice facility, all of these things, and obviously the Ring of Honor or a team Hall of Fame. And I look at, even though the Bengals don't have the decorated franchise history of a Green Bay Packers or some of these other teams, I think it's a draw for a lot of fans to come. And these are, a lot of these stadiums have wings in their stadium designated to honoring the honoring of these players, and it's something that fans can go and check out, learn the history of the team. And Mike Brown just has not been keen on doing any of this, and it's kind of a sad thing. Now, with the Graham thing, as I mentioned, there are a lot of positives with it. I think it's a really cool gesture to do to a former player, and it also, reciprocating wise, it's a cool thing to see Graham, who played for a number of different teams in his long career, come back to the Bengals and say, this is what I want to do. I want to do this. Can we make it happen? Obviously, his experience with the Bengals is a positive one, and the cynical fans, those who cover the team, the outside national media, obviously have some criticisms of the team and how they operate, how they treat current and former players. And obviously, Graham is one of a lot that haven't really come out in the same way, but that have had a positive experience. And mostly, most of those players, I would say, were under Marvin Lewis's tenure, which is another feather in his cap as well. But to me, it just is kind of odd. Like I said, it's a kicker, and not kickers are players too. The whole thing. But I don't know. You mentioned a litany of names there that are so deserving of the same kind of treatment, a retirement of their number, the Ring of Honor, all that stuff, and they do this thing. And it's a cool gesture. It's the right thing to do, but it's almost like, okay, well, what about all these other guys? And I'm not saying Shayne Graham isn't deserving of this cool honor, but there are a lot of other guys who deserve the same type of thing, and the team hasn't embraced them the same way. So I ask, is this maybe a changing of the guard in terms of how they view past players, or is this just kind of, oh yeah, that's a cool thing to do, let's do it?
I think it's more the second. It's kind of cool, and it's not like if he's Justin Tucker or Steven Gostkowski or one of these guys who is probably going to be in the Hall of Fame, in the NFL Hall of Fame. Yeah, it makes it seems to make a lot of sense. But like you said, it's just he was a solid guy, kind of like a Robert Gathers or D'Amato Peck. I mean, it just seems like, or a Jonathan Fanene. So yeah, he's a nice player, had a decent career, but
right.
Yeah, of all the people, it doesn't seem like the one you would pick. And it's not like they can't have a Hall of Fame. I mean, the Reds next door, they have a whole entire museum outside the stadium dedicated to the Reds. So at the very least, the Bengals could have, something inside the stadium, a picture, I don't know. Something. Yeah. I mean, the Reds even have things like outside the stadium. And
I hate to be this guy that, downplays or brings up the negatives on such a cool thing like this for Graham, but it almost points to the Marvin Lewis, Mike Brown way of almost favoring certain players, guys that do things the right way, guys that practice the right way. They're quote unquote their guys. So I don't know exactly if that plays into it. Maybe it's just me nitpicking a little bit, but I don't know. All in all, cool gesture, good for Shayne Graham. Hopefully, it's a step towards some other things that the team is doing, and it goes into the right way. And hopefully, it's maybe a trend that's building with the team. So Shayne Graham retires as a Bengal. Good for him, and he signed a one-day contract to do so. So good for Shayne. Hopefully, he'll kind of stick around the team and do some other cool things, appearances, and all of that stuff as well. Scott, the Bengals, even though they're not really truly active in free agency, we're going to switch gears here, by the way, in case you didn't know that. They did pick up a guy who's pretty interesting. A little bit of news and notes here. A pretty interesting guy, cornerback, and I may butcher his name. I hope not. Bene Benikwere. And he was a guy who in 2015 was a very valuable member of a very, very strong Carolina Panthers defense. Low-round pick who kind of overachieved, played well. As they let Josh Norman walk, they made Benikwere kind of their, I guess, number one, maybe number two corner on their team, and he really struggled. They cut him midway through the year. He kind of bounced around a little bit, and then he was floating out there in the free agent market. This year, the Bengals picked him up over the past week, and it provides an interesting conversation for not only his role with the Bengals, but the cornerback group as a whole now. Obviously, Benikwere is a talented guy, probably not NFL starter material based on what we saw last year, but definitely could be a good number 3, maybe as high as number 2, but number 3, number 4 corner, a guy that can do some things. Apparently, he had a lot of suitors and decided to go with the Bengals. Now, this signing, obviously, I don't want to say it doesn't point to them being active in free agency, but this is one of those moves that doesn't count against compensatory pick formulas and all of that. So that might have been why the Bengals wanted him, aside from his skill set as well. What do you think Benikwere's fit is in this defense, especially in terms of the depth chart? And is this anything more than just an insurance policy based on Adam Jones's legal situation and Dre Kirkpatrick's impending free agency? So they have at least a veteran guy to go along with William Jackson III. They have Darqueze Dennard, Josh Shaw, Kavari Russell, who played towards the end of the season. Obviously, a lot of good young players there. I think they'd want to keep at least one between Kirkpatrick and Jones. But what do you make of this signing? Do you like it? Do you like the player? Do you like the fit?
Well, I think Mike Brown is fine, and Marvin Lewis are finally listening. How many years we've been complaining the Bengals don't do anything in free agency. They don't do anything in free agency. They're like, dang it. Okay, we just signed Benikwere and we just signed Shayne Graham. Free agency is over. We have one free agency. So that might be what I'm hoping that's in jest. I'm hoping that's not their plan to say, hey, we signed this guy, we're done with free agency for the year. I think seriously it is an insurance thing. I would be surprised if they kept Adam Jones. But then again, with some of the issues some of the other guys have had, there was a period when Marvin Lewis didn't want Chris Henry back on the team, and Mike Brown brought him back. So maybe they think, we can reach Adam Jones, we're going to keep him. But you kind of hope they're thinking, okay, we are going to cut him. And I've heard, they might want to wait till June because of some of the cap money that would be involved as far as the timing of cutting him. And then also it is depth because you don't know what's going to happen with Dre Kirkpatrick. They haven't signed him obviously yet. Free agency starting up in a month or so. So obviously, you want to have someone on the roster. Like you said, he isn't really a guy you would hope to have as a starter. And if you go back to his scouting report when he entered the draft, he had a very slow 40 time and seemed to get burned on the vertical routes. He had a 4.63 at the combine. I think his pro day was like 4.69. So not exactly a burner. Was a small school guy who tended to struggle against better wide receivers. Seemed to be more of a nickel guy who could make plays here and there if but wasn't going to give you a whole lot in the running game. So you kind of look at that and you say, okay, well, he's someone who, if they have on the roster, okay, is probably going to compete with someone like Kivari Russell or Josh Shaw for that third or fourth spot, assuming that William Jackson III is going to have one of those spots, and you really hope that Dre Kirkpatrick's back. But if he isn't, you have someone like Denard, and he's been hurt. He hasn't been as impressive as you would hope for a first round pick. So I think like if anything, it's just it's a Chaikey Brown kind of a thing. Yeah, we just want depth. We want bodies in here. This guy has played before. Let's bring him in. And as far as Benikwere is concerned, he's probably looking at it, seeing, hey, the Adam Jones thing, Dre Kirkpatrick could be gone. This could be a spot where this team really needs a starter. They really need someone. I have a great chance here to possibly break a roster. Break in, not only get on the active 53 or the 53-man roster, but even on the 44 and playing on game day. So it makes a lot of sense for him, and I think it makes sense for the Bengals. And we tend to see this every year that we tend to forget about as the years go by. But they do these kind of signings before the draft, where they just add some depth because you don't know what you're going to get in the draft, and you don't want to enter the draft in a spot where you don't know what you're going to have, and you don't want to say, well, we didn't really get any cornerbacks, any whatever, and then when the draft comes, you're really forced to go that route. So you kind of want to have at least something in every position, so when you draft, you can pick the best players there, not be forced to go in a certain direction. So to me, it seems more like that than a sign that says, yes, we've taken this guy purely because of who he is, because we think he is going to be a great starter for us.
Yeah, and why I like it if the Bengals don't plan on making him, they may sit here and say, Kirkpatrick's going to be too expensive, we can't keep him, so we'll go with Adam Jones, and maybe this guy, Benikwere, is a guy that can start for him. I don't like that idea. I think you saw, and granted, a lot of the stuff that are knocks against him were, in terms of why he was cut from Carolina last year, is he got absolutely torched by Julio Jones, who, along with Antonio Brown and A.J. Green, are known as the top three receivers in the league. That kind of spelled his doom in Carolina. The Carolina themselves just weren't the same team, same defense that they were when they made the Super Bowl the year prior. So I think it was kind of a combination of factors there. But I don't like it if the plan is, hey, this guy could really be a good guy for us, or maybe even a starter for this year as we continue to groom William Jackson, that sort of thing. I don't like it from that standpoint. I like it from a couple of other standpoints. I like it a lot from a couple of other standpoints, and one of which you raised with the draft. It's something where the Bengals, even though they might have they might lose Kirkpatrick, they don't know what's going on with Jones, so they may say, look, we might need a cornerback in the draft. Well, they signed a guy who's got some experience and has had some good film as a pro. They go in the draft then not absolutely starving for a cornerback. And now, granted, I think if you look at it, you wouldn't be comfortable if Jones and Kirkpatrick are gone, and then you've got your young, talented guys, but a lot of them are unproven. I like it because the Bengals use it. You mentioned him kind of being a good nickel or dime option guy, and the Bengals, a lot of their base defensive packages are nickel formations, especially in today's NFL. They like to trot out a lot of defensive backs. So I like it from that standpoint. I also like it because the team has done well in previous years. Now, Benikwere is a lot younger than the guys I'm going to talk about, but they got a lot out of guys that were on the trash heap, especially at cornerback. Terrence Newman was one. Nate Clements, even though he wasn't an outstanding guy, he played pretty well for the Bengals for a couple of years. So they were able to get things out of these guys who were discarded by other teams. And this guy, the fact that he was supposedly chased and had offers from a couple of other teams, gives me hope. I think he, like you said, because of the speed, the 4.6 40 speed, all of that, I think he's probably better suited for the slot. I just hope that they still make it a relatively open competition, whether they hang on to Jones and or Kirkpatrick for a slot spot with Shaw. Obviously, Denard's going to be in the mix there. I hope all of those guys get a fair shot and a fair look at it. But all in all, it builds depth. And I think then the Bengals have, a pretty good young core of guys. You also, even if you lose Kirkpatrick, and you keep Jones, you don't know if he's going to be suspended. And in that respect, even though I'm not comfortable with Benikwere as a starter, maybe he could spot start for a game or two and they can get by with him. There's a lot of options there. So overall, I think it's a good signing. I wouldn't say I was jumping up and down about it, but I think it's a good signing, a name that a lot of NFL fans know. Obviously not a household name, but a guy that a lot of NFL fans know. And this team, even though they kind of, I hate to use the term, dumpster dive a little bit in terms of free agency, they've gotten good things out of players in that respect in the past. So hopefully they can do the same here. And it's probably a low risk, potentially high reward type of deal. And, he obviously is comfortable with the system and his possibility of making the team and playing time, as you mentioned. So it's not really it's kind of a little bit of a win-win at this point, unless they have way loftier plans than with him than we expect. Any additional thoughts, Scott?
Yeah, I guess I don't know if, as far as dumpster dive, I might say they're a frugal team. They are the team that goes with your friends to the Mexican restaurant and just gets the water and chips kind of a team. Because sometimes the chips are pretty filling, and if your friends get full, you can eat their leftovers if they don't want to take them home. So that tends to be their strategy, and sometimes it works.
That's right. So the Bengals sign Bene Benikwere, along with the interesting news with Shayne Graham coming back to the Bengals to sign a one-day contract to retire. So even though it's kind of a slower period of the year, the Bengals are kind of doing some interesting things at this point and gearing up for free agency and the draft. And obviously, all of that coverage in terms of what they do in both of those aspects will be covered on this show and on the host of this show, Cincy Jungle, SB Nation Cincy Jungle website. So check out all of the stuff. Scott and I and our other co-host Connor Howe all write for Cincy Jungle. So we'll be putting up a lot of different stuff over the next couple of weeks and months for sure. So check us out there. I mentioned also that we're on iTunes, we're on SoundCloud, we're on YouTube. Check us out there. If you want to shoot us some stuff via email or Twitter, at BengalsOBI on Twitter, the OB Insider at gmail.com via email. So we look forward to hearing from you. Speaking of hearing from our listeners, Scott, I didn't think we'd have enough time, but we've got a little time. We had a couple of questions in the YouTube chat that I'd like to get to. Again, one is from Waldo that we love hearing from him. He asked some good questions. This is not really related to what we've been talking about much of tonight per se, except for kind of the front office aspect. But he asks, without any extension we know of for Marvin Lewis, and I'm going to segue real quick. Obviously, we've talked about the fact that Lewis alluded to that he's in previous weeks, he's been talking with the front office about a possible extension once again to remain the coach after this season. This is the last year of his current deal. So without any extension we know from Marvin Lewis, is this Mike Brown telling us that there will be a change if things don't get better? I'm assuming things don't get better this year is what Waldo means. What do you think, Scott? Scott, you're muted.
Okay, I'll try that again.
Yeah, there you go. There you are. There's that beautiful voice.
I had this wonderful answer muted, so I'm just going to give like the really lame answer.
You're going to half-ass it?
Just imagine whatever I said, whatever you didn't hear was a much better answer. Basically, awesome. I think fans can dream. You want to think Marvin Lewis is going to be gone. You think D'Amato Pecco, Ray Maluga, granted, we thought the same thing with Nugent, and that finally did happen. So I think we can dream big. Until they enter the season without Lewis not having another year, I just don't have enough faith in Mike Brown to say, yes, he's going to expect production. As much as I don't want to say that, I just, the track record seems to be there as far as hanging on to guys we really shouldn't be hanging on to. And it's almost like, the Marvin Lewis thing, it's kind of like the guy saying, have you done anything bad? Oh, no, I'm a pretty good guy. I haven't killed anybody. Okay, you haven't killed anyone, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're a good person. I mean, you could be doing a lot of other stuff. There's kind of a wide range between, being St. Francis and, Jeffrey Dahmer, Adolf Hitler, whatever. There's, just because you haven't, committed genocide or mass murder doesn't mean, you're exactly, St. Francis. You could, and that tends to be what the Bengals do. It's like, well, yeah, he's not horrible. We win half our games, and that's pretty decent. And I just haven't seen anything from Mike Brown to indicate they're willing to take that next step, unless, like you said, someday when he does step down, either, obviously you don't want to wish anyone to die, but if he does die, or if he just says, hey, I'm old enough, I'm done with this, I'm retiring, Katie Blackburn, you take over, maybe at that point we could see a change. But other than that, I think it's hard for, old dogs learn new tricks. So I would be very surprised if that's the case.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think, unfortunately, this has been a question, and not to disparage Waldo in his question here, but this is just a question that has come up a lot over the past handful of years when Lewis has signed these 1 or 2 year extensions, these little small deals to remain with the club. And as they've continued to make the playoffs over the past couple of years, the team kind of says, well, hey, he's in a sense doing his job. He's getting the team to the postseason. I understand it. I understand his tenure with the club and them continuing to extend him in a couple of fronts. Number one is, we've talked about this on the show before, the continuity aspect. Some of the best teams in the NFL have long tenured head coaches, but those are head coaches who have been to and or won a Super Bowl. And Lewis isn't there. And if you look at his overall record, and not even really counting his playoff record, he's slightly above average. And he's probably a top 12 coach maybe in the NFL, depending on how you rank him. But we've said this almost ad nauseum. Lewis has done a lot of good things for this team, a lot of good things for the city of Cincinnati. He's brought respectability to him, but he might just be nothing more than a Marty Schottenheimer, a guy that can rebuild a terrible team, make them competitive, get them relatively far, but he can't win the big games. And unfortunately, that's kind of been a stigma of Marvin Lewis in his tenure as head coach here. Given his overall record and his postseason record, I would be hard pressed to find, aside from maybe the Browns or the Jaguars or somebody, I would be hard pressed to find many other teams in the current NFL where if Lewis were to leave, well, let me backtrack. I would be hard pressed to find a team who had a coach that long with that type of record, that type of postseason record, who would continue to be in control of this team as head coach. Now, I think it's all about the working relationship Marvin Lewis and Mike Brown have. I think Mike Brown saw the coaching carousel that he went through after his father died and all of the quarterback issues that followed that. And Marvin Lewis, one of the things he's been able to do is find productive quarterbacks and long-term solutions. Now, they may not be the absolute best or fan favorites, whether it's Carson Palmer or Andy Dalton. He's really stabilized that position for this team, which was a major issue since Boomer Esiason left. So, to answer Waldo's question, in my opinion, Scott, I think you've got some further thoughts, but to answer my question, I don't think it signals that. I think anybody who has a logical sense of football and how teams should operate should say, look, Marvin, we've given you a lot of benefits of the doubt over the years. This is it, man. You've done a lot of good things. We appreciate it, but we're stuck in neutral. That's my take, Scott.
Yeah, I think the best analogy, and this just came to me, I don't know why it took me so long to realize this, but for anyone who's read the Lord of the Rings books, or at least seen the movies, I assume some of our fans or some of the followers of Cincy Jungle and who follow this podcast have seen the movies. The Bengals are Minas Tirith, which is the big city in the third movie near the end when they have the big battle outside, for those who don't know the name. Marvin Lewis is Denethor. He is the steward of Gondor. He's the guy that kind of, I'm doing a decent job. I'm holding down the fort. It's better than having chaos. It's better than the city falling into disrepair. I've kind of, I've built the walls a little bit. Trash is being taken out. But you're not really doing anything. You're kind of letting the enemy, build up outside the gates. You're just kind of sitting there, twiddling your thumbs. You're kind of, just keeping with the same old, what we're doing is good enough. And it's not good enough. Like you said, you need the king. You need to return the king to come and fix things, and he's just not that guy. He is nothing more than the steward who's kind of sitting there, just kind of making sure things are done to a point, but doesn't have the ability to get any farther. And I think that's the one frustration, is that no one is making that change to say, hey, this is nice that we have, but you just can't live with nice, because those orcs aren't just going to sit around because we have nice. They're going to keep storming the gates until we do something about it.
Yeah, kind of almost false prophet-ish. A guy who came in and a lot of people thought would resurrect the team, kind of did, and to an extent, but not to the extent now that a lot of fans want. I like that we're geeking out here, Scott. You're talking about Lord of the Rings, because I don't know if you saw the title of this episode. It's a title of a Star Wars episode. It's called A New Hope, is what I titled it. So hopefully I don't hear from George Lucas or Lucasfilm or anything like that in terms of cease and desist order or anything like that.
Well, this was episode 4 and not episode 29.
There you go. Oh, gosh, I like where your head's at. We're going to do one more question and then wrap it up, Scott. We had one more. And before we get to it, Ryan Jones in the YouTube chat says, I see Marvin Lewis as a defensive coach, like lineman or secondary coach, not an offensive one, or maybe, and he didn't mention head coach, but maybe a lot of people feel that he is an excellent coordinator, not necessarily an evaluator of talent, not necessarily a head coach. So one more, and it was from, let's see here. It was from Nick Marks. Has the Darrelle Revis story and time since Adam Jones's issue kind of quelled some of the criticism or I don't know. I guess criticism of the Adam Jones situation. And for those who aren't familiar, Darrelle Revis, I believe it was last Saturday late night / Sunday morning. He was walking. He was with the Jets. He signed a lucrative deal there in a series of lucrative deals he's signed over the past couple of years. He's from Pittsburgh. He went to Pitt for college. He was in downtown Pittsburgh walking past 2 a.m. by himself in a downtown area, not known as the best area of Pittsburgh. Obviously, you would think Saturday night, Sunday morning, he was probably out on the town doing whatever, but he was by himself, which is kind of weird. A couple of young men approached him and asked him if he's Darrelle Revis from the Jets. He said yes. These guys then proceeded to videotape him on their cell phones and kind of, I don't want to say harass him, but kind of asked him questions and talked to him. Long story short, Revis got in some sort of fight with these two young men, along with another bystander that came to Revis's aid. The two young men who initially approached Revis ended up getting knocked out. Revis took one of their cell phones, threw it in the street, and destroyed it to I guess, in an attempt to eliminate the video there. And now Revis is facing, I believe, 4 charges, including 3 felonies, something to that effect. Some big-time stuff. Obviously, that's kind of headline news, but it's kind of interesting because another AFC cornerback, another veteran guy who's up there in age, coming off a disappointing season. There's a lot of parallels with this. This is new, Scott. This is relatively new, whereas Jones's situation was right after New Year's. I guess, does this lessen what happened with Jones earlier in the year in terms of severity? I don't know. How do you line these two instances?
I think to me they seem like totally different animals, and only because with the Revis thing, it just seems like they're trying to bait him. And we've seen this happen in pro sports before, didn't it? I think it happened with maybe was it Benson a few years ago when down in Texas?
Yep, it's a great
where
call.
The same kind of thing happened, and when you are a big name and you do have money. It's interesting and it's kind of interesting how they asked him. If he had said no, they probably would have kept on going. But since he said, yes, I am Darrelle Revis, like, oh, okay. And you mentioned they get their cell phones out because you're trying to record this because, and I haven't heard this happening so much recently as it seemed to be more of a big thing a few years ago where you'd be at a club or something and you would kind of keep on harassing a person, kind of egging them on, and then they finally take the bait. They finally have had enough. They strike back, and then you get the video evidence, and then you press charges, and you try to get them settled out of court so you can get some money from them. And it just seems like a big setup, which is very unfortunate because granted, you can say you can argue against Revis, well, you shouldn't be doing that, but at the same point, when you're being set up, you're kind of how far is the point where you say enough's enough? I really wish these guys weren't doing this crap, and which seems to be very different than the Adam Jones thing, where the Adam Jones was, as soon as that came out, everyone's like, we need to cut this guy. He's just a bad dude. It wasn't so much that people were trying to entice him into doing something.
I agree with you on that. It's kind of the thing to me, especially when Revis is and has been one of the most highest paid players in the NFL. What are you doing out walking around the streets at that time of night and that on the weekend? What are you doing? More so, what are you doing by yourself at that time of night? Why aren't you taking a cab, an Uber to get home? And this is a guy, I think Revis is now 30, and not that, that's old. I'm going to at least not date ourselves here, Scott, by saying that. Not that that's old, but he's been in the league for a long time. This isn't a 22-year-old guy who is just coming into his second season and maybe gets in a scrape. This is a guy who definitely should know better, and I don't understand the circumstances. I totally agree with the provocation aspect, and I think that's the main difference between, at least from details, and granted, we're all kind of ignorant to both of these because we weren't there. We don't know exactly what happened, but we've heard details, be it through police reports, news outlets, things like that in both of these cases. And it seemed to me that Jones was a little bit more of the aggressor in some of these situations, whereas Revis was kind of a bit more of a retaliator. Now, does that make him a much better person, or does it make his situation better than Jones's? Not necessarily. It just, there's a little bit of differences that need to be settled out here. And Scott, just kind of to talk about the point about stuff we've talked about with Adam Jones, Sean Steele in our YouTube chat says, I think we need to move on from Jones, honestly. And I think a lot of people feel that way. I know we've talked about that on this show. Still some more stuff to play out with Jones. Obviously some more stuff to play out with Revis. I think if they remain with the clubs, or if they get cut by either club, I think they're both probably looking at some league discipline, and whether they stay with their team or someone else picks them up, that's something that they're going to have to deal with. As far as these
Revis goes, I think you mentioned one of the key things earlier when you were talking about why would he be out. Well, if he's from Pitt, went to Pitt, you kind of get a sense of your hometown area. Like
that makes sense.
And it could have, when he's 20, 25 years old, when he's in college, when he's a young guy, these probably the same area he went through. Hey, I know this area. I know the neighborhood. I never felt, any problems here when I was a young kid. So you go back years later and there's some times where, you just don't do that. If it's not a nicer neighborhood, there's some situations where, there's some places like when you're college age or younger that you run around because, obviously no one's real. It's just a different environment. You don't know how much that area's changed in those years. You're obviously a bigger target now than when you're, some little, 20-year-old kid running around. And so my guess is that must have been something like that where it's something he felt familiar with. Yeah, I used to go through all the time when I was a kid. There's no big deal.
I agree. I totally feel you. But again, when he was 20, 21 years old, he didn't have, 50 million in the bank.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I totally agree. It's his hometown. He's familiar, all of that stuff. But at the same time, you got to know, and right or wrong, I think, I think people are wrong, just personally speaking. I think people are wrong to idolize athletes, and everybody's human. Everybody makes mistakes. I think you probably got to know what you're doing at that time of night, where you are, who you are in terms of stature and being able to be easily recognized. Maybe the best course of action would have just been, are you Darrelle Revis? No, I'm not. And the whole situation would have been quelled at that point. But both very interesting scenarios with Adam Jones and Darrelle Revis. A lot of parallels, some differences. Obviously, both guys are facing a bit of trouble, whether it's by the legal system or from the NFL office, or both. So interesting to see. And we'll continue to update, obviously, both on Cincy Jungle and on this show, what happens with Adam Jones. And who knows? I mean, obviously, Jones's thing happened earlier than what happened with Revis, so maybe there's a precedent set there in terms of NFL punishment if Jones gets charged with certain things, or however the courts rule there. Vice versa with Revis, just kind of depends. But we'll keep an eye on that. That was a good question. That's gonna wrap it up. Any final thoughts before we get out of here, Scott?
Yeah, but they don't come to mind. Oh, yeah, we'll mention my Dayton Flyers are first place in the A10, so
okay.
Rooting for them, rooting for the cold weather. And one other comment, I don't know if I'll just offer a congratulations online to you guys.
To me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I appreciate that. Yeah. For those who don't know, I've kind of kept it relatively quiet, but my co-host and some people at Cincy Jungle know. My wife just gave birth to a baby boy early Monday morning. So if you can probably see the bags under my eyes here, I'm not getting a ton of sleep. And if I was a little foggy headed tonight, I apologize. But wife is doing well, baby's doing well, and he's adorable. I'm smitten with the little guy, and I appreciate that, Scott. That's cool. I guess not. What's that?
As to say, we've seen my son on a episode earlier this year, so I think someday, we're going to retire, step aside, and our kids are just going to take over, and
that's right.
And they're going to read the comments, and they're going to say hi to Nicholas.
Yep.
Ask us to say hi.
Yep. And so I appreciate that. It's my first child, so I'm kind of in a whirlwind myself, mentally and emotionally and all that stuff. But it's good. I'm stoked, and I appreciate you saying that. So I didn't name him after a Bengals player, though. So just so everybody is clear about that, he wasn't named after a Bengals player, unfortunately. Yeah, I tried a couple. I tried to slide a couple in there that weren't really recognizable, but my wife's pretty smart. She gets it. So, anyways, that's going to do it for us tonight on the Orange and Black Insider. If you weren't able to catch us live on YouTube or at Cincy Jungle, again, you can catch us. Catch our material on our SoundCloud and YouTube channels. We're also on iTunes for download, so check out all of the stuff. We not only do the show as a whole that we put out there, but we segment it for a little bit more listening segments, if that's more of your thing. So check out all of the stuff we have on those platforms. Again, we're on Cincy Jungle as well. You can check out our stuff on YouTube and get in touch with us via email as well, theobinsider@gmail.com. Twitter handle is Bengals OBI. So for Scott Schultze, I'm Anthony Cosenza. Thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate that you keep sending us these questions and tuning in when you're able. There's gonna be a lot of stuff to talk about in the coming weeks, and we're gonna be excited to do that. So thanks everybody. Again, Anthony Cosenza for Scott Schultze. This has been the Orange and Black Insider, and Houday.